So here I am right in the middle of downtown Hong Kong. We're just a few minutes walk from Hong Kong Station on a bridge that spans 2, 4, 6, 8 lanes of divided traffic. We have traffic going every direction at multiple levels. So I'm set up here waiting for a blue hour shot so I can capture all of these cars, leaving really cool light trails through the scene. Now in really busy cities like New York, Hong Kong, and Tokyo, there is so much traffic on the roads that you create these beautiful compositional leading lines by using long exposure photography to capture the trails as the cars move. So what we're going to be doing particularly for this shot is capturing the total scene during blue hour using bracketed exposures. Then when it gets a little bit darker, we're going to get a few different 30-second exposures and combine those together to create as many trails in our composition as possible. Now this requires your camera to be stationary and to not move the whole time. So I'm going to do one other thing that I haven't done before because there's a lot of vibration on this bridge. I'm going to take a little piece of gaffer tape and I'm going to tape the focus ring and the zoom ring on my lens just in case I happen to bump it, somebody else bumps into it, or I move it. The shot is only going to work if the camera stays absolutely still, so I can combine my bracketed exposures for the total scene as well as my multiple different exposures for the different light trails. Moving around this area a little bit earlier, I decided that this is not my favorite position. My favorite position is actually just to my right where another cameraman is set up. So admittedly, I actually got here a bit too late. I should have been here a little bit earlier than him, then I could have had the prime location. So right now, I'm a little left of center of the center row of traffic. What I would have liked to have done is be right in the center of the road so I could have all of the light trails evenly dispersed on the bottom of my image. Still, one click here to the right is not so bad. I still see all those car trails, but I'm kind of a perfectionist. So if I ever came back to this position, I'd make sure to get the one that I really wanted. And I'd make sure to get here early enough to beat all the other photographers and videographers to it. Most of the concentration we've done on the cityscape photography so far has been all about wide shots and getting the iconic skylines. But this time we're at street level and we're so close to these ultra tall buildings that we have to tilt the camera up really far. So a horizontal composition doesn't work. We're going to be shooting in a vertical format, in portrait mode. So this is going to be one of those rare occurrences where I'm not capturing a wide skyline and I'm starting to point the camera up in vertical format. If you look at the horizontal version of this compared to the vertical version, you'll see why. Well, right off the bat, looking at this image, you can see that I've had to tilt the camera so far up that I've lost the road. So I've lost that interest of all the car trails. I also get a lot of stuff on the left and the right of the image that I don't really need. I don't feel that it's the focus of the photo. So while it's pretty good, I still think that the vertical shot is the winner here. Something else to point out about this shot in particular, this whole time we've been worried about getting the lines of our buildings, our vertical lines, to be perfectly straight. When we point the camera up, we're working with distortion, and in this case, there's no way that we can get those vertical lines of these towers to be perfectly straight. So instead, we're going to concentrate on using that distortion to our advantage to create something really unique here compositionally. Typically, with my style of photography, I don't shoot this style often. I like to have all of my lines completely parallel, completely vertical and perfect. But in this case, I think it's a really cool composition. So what I've done here is I've used the lines in the street as corner leading lines. So I have a feeling once it starts getting darker, these headlights are going to create additional leading lines to the bottom corners of my image. In order for this shot to work correctly, I need to essentially focus on 2 different shots. Let's pretend that I was just trying to capture this at the perfect blue hour. In that case, I'd set my camera up just like it is, right on f8. I'd bracket 5 exposures at the right time at the perfect blue hour, and I'd call it a night. But what I also want to do is capture the light trails. And I'm going to tell you why I can't do that with a single shot or the single blue hour brackets. The reason is I have so many different veins of traffic, all moving at different speeds. By the time that this road is moving, for example, these cars are stopped. Then when these cars are moving, this road is clear because it's blocked at the light. So after I'm done capturing the perfect blue hour, I'm gonna wait till full dark and I'm gonna focus on capturing each road's perfect blend of as many light trails as possible. So right now I'm not sure how many that could be. That could be 2, maybe 4, or even 5 different 30-second exposures that I'm going to try to get all of the best light trails for each road. Then in Photoshop, I'm going to take the perfect blue hour, blend it together, fix the highlights. Then I'm going to bring those light trail images that I created into Photoshop, blend it all together in one seamless composite. Since we haven't done this before, just to make it perfectly clear, the only thing that's time sensitive is the blue hour shot. Once I feel I get that blue hour shot, as long as there's traffic on the road at night, there's plenty of light to capture it. So the blue hour is starting to look really good. So what I'm doing right now is I'm bracketing 5 exposures so I can control the highlights, the extreme highlights in these buildings. So I'm essentially building the main image here. So take a look at this blue hour shot. I think it looks really good. Buildings look good, sky looks good, and we even ended up getting the moon in the upper left corner, which is pretty cool. The only thing is, the light trails aren't there yet. So now that the blue hour has been captured, I'm gonna switch modes a little bit and I'm gonna just concentrate on capturing the trails from the lights. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna turn my exposure bracketing off. So this is gonna be a single exposure. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn my ISO all the way down to low 1.0. After that, I'm gonna turn the f-stop up until I can get a 25 or a 30-second exposure. I've done some tests and it looks like at f16, I can get 25 seconds, which is perfect for light trails. So now it's basically just a waiting game. I'm gonna try to time it at the right moment when all lanes of traffic are moving. If I can capture all the lanes moving, that's the best case scenario. But honestly, I can concentrate on each vein of traffic, making that its own exposure, because in Photoshop later on, I can just combine them all together. Here's all the shots I've been taking trying to capture all of the light trails together. As you can see, some of them work, some of them have some of the cars moving when some of the lanes have stopped, and then right here at the end, you can see I've managed to get all of them together. This may seem a little complicated right now because I'm just explaining it and we're shooting through it. But once I take you into post-processing and I show you all the steps and all the different layers, you'll see just how simple it is to create this for yourself. Locations like this are really fun to photograph, but not only that, they can be great ways to show just how busy a city can be. So if you're gonna find these shots in major cities, look for big areas of intersections. A lot of the times in big cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo, and New York, there's gonna be flyover walkways where you can get above these intersections. Find the right lines of those roads leading and getting the light trails, and as long as there's an interest behind it, some nice tall buildings, you can have dozens of these shots in each city. So far, a trip to Hong Kong has been really difficult for those long distance epic skylines because we've been battling a lot of foggy conditions. The nice thing about shooting locations like this, it doesn't really matter how foggy it is because our greatest distance, the farthest thing away from the camera, isn't far enough to register that there's fog. So if the weather's perfect, go up to the top vantage point, get that infinite urban sprawl, but if the weather's not so good and there's a little bit of haze, do these street level things. You can always find something to shoot every night of the week. I think this looks pretty good. I think all the frames that I've captured are gonna work perfectly. So let's take it into Photoshop, put it all together, and make one great image. Welcome back to the studio, everybody. We're going to be doing some more post-processing today in Hong Kong, and this time we're going to be adding light trails, car light trails, to a really cool vertical shot that we got in downtown Hong Kong. This was a really cool spot to shoot, and it was also problematic. I explained that it's often very hard to get all of the light sources that you want in a single exposure, especially during the blue hour, and this proved to be very true. By the time I was able to get the clean lines without any cars in the light trails in my 30-second exposures, it was well past blue hour into full dark. And the reason is there were all these different streams of traffic, and it was all just traffic jam because people were stop, stop, stop. So it was hard. I had to wait for green lights, and then I basically clicked the shutter every time I thought I'd be able to get a clean street. So the idea was to not try to get all of the streets at once, but just get pieces. Like if I could get the left side and then the center and then the right side, then I could piece them together. So the cool thing was we shot for a while, and I was able to get some really nice ones. So I'm not just going to be able to show you guys how to create the light trails from different exposure. We can go over something that I call light stacking. That's where we can actually stack a few exposures of car trails together to make even more trails. So it makes much more for an intense effect. So let's take a look at what I have in Capture One. Here inside of Capture One, you can see this is basically what a moon looks like at a wide angle. It's just a distorted blob, so we're going to get rid of the moon. But basically what I have here is I have a neutral exposure, and then I have a -2 exposure. And basically that's going to cover the highlights. And you can see here, if I hit the clipping, you can see that these areas are clipped, definitely clipped in the highlights. So we're going to use this other layer here to just kind of fill in those gaps. That's pretty easy, that's pretty straightforward. We're going to do that with the same luminosity masking technique that we've been using for most of this tutorial. Where it gets more interesting is that we're then going to actually add in the car trails. So you can see this shot, peak of blue hour, it's my favorite color sky. You can see that I have some trails here, some here, and then cars around. And then as the night progresses, you're actually going to see the moon rise a little bit more. So this is a late blue hour, and you can see now I'm starting to get some of the car trails here, but this is the traffic. This was a traffic jam nightmare. You can also see I'm getting cars here mixed with trails. I don't want that. I love the way that this looks, the red. This is all really perfect in my opinion. So as we progress through these, you can see that this improved even more. This is still bad. But if I keep going, now you can see that I'm starting to get trails later on. You can see that we're already missed our window of blue hour. And the reason we missed the window of blue hour is we're actually getting the light. You can see that light illuminating. If there were clouds, this would be illuminating a canopy of clouds. But right now, it's just casting all this crazy light. And then at the end here, I was able to get another one with some different trails. So these are kind of interchangeable, I'd say. So in this file, for example, I like the way that this looks a little bit more than this. But if you look at the right side here for this last one, you can see we have a bus. So I decided that this is going to basically be the car trails layer. But the first thing we're going to need to do is make our adjustments for this layer here and then bring in the highlights. So I can't recover the highlights here. I can't get them back all the way. I'll just go ahead and get a little bit back. And then this is really where I have to make the decision about the shadows and how much I want to push the shadows. In this case, I'm not going to go too much. In fact, I'm going to leave that probably about 5. And I'm just going to try to recover some of the highlights, and that's just going to pull it back just a little bit. I'm going to right-click, Export, Variants. Go back into Capture One, and now let's work on the highlights here. So I'm just going to pull the shadows up a little bit. Let's keep this fairly neutral. We'll keep this here, and then keep this fairly neutral. That looks pretty good, and I'll export this. We'll go ahead and select all, copy, close, and then paste right on top. Okay, so here we are going to use the luminosity masking trick here that I've been showing you guys. We're going to go to the channels. I'm going to load RGB, and I'm going to create a new channel for it. We're going to take a look at it. I'll deselect here. And I like this, but I want to kind of neutralize the sky. So remember, this is where we have the choice. We can either clamp, or we can use the intersection trick, and I'm going to use the intersection trick. So I'm going to load the mask, and then I'm going to intersect it by holding Shift, Option, Command, and I'm clicking here. I'm going to create a new mask here, and you can see that I should have, in this case, knocked out most of the sky and just concentrated on these extreme highlights. So I'll go ahead and select the extreme highlights, re-enable my RGB layer, create a folder, mask on the folder, and I'll drop this right in. Now, I could leave it just from here to here, but you can see I'm having some problems. I don't like everything that it's doing, so what I'm going to do, as usual, I'm going to do this selectively by masking in a certain portion only. So we'll go ahead and zoom in here, and I'll select a brush tool, something at about 30%, and then here where I feel it's just too hot, what I'm going to actually do is just start brushing in the highlights. So I'm just going to fix these highlights. Now, not all these highlights have a problem. I really don't have too much of a problem with all this. In fact, most of the building here, this all looks pretty good. But here you can see that we're losing some of that detail. So I want to go ahead and get that detail back, get the detail back here. And I'm just doing this selectively because really the scene was 99% there, and this definitely needs to be brought back in. See, I don't like this. Here's a good example where that already looks good. I don't want to cover any of that up. Maybe just these areas that feel a little bit blown out. Everything else looks really good. Maybe this sign here. Maybe some of these down here. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and back that up, and that looks much better. Small difference, but it's going to be a big difference when it all gets put together. So here we have our adjusted raw, and our super highlights. And then inside here, we'll call this raw highlights. All right, so now let's go back into Capture One. So we've done the blending. This is the initial blending. Now it's time to start talking about our car trails. Well, I'm going to bring all of these in sequentially, basically, or individually, and we're going to stack them. But the first thing I want to do is pick the best one. We've already talked a little bit about this, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color code all these for you guys. So when you're in here, you're going to know the ones that we're going to be using. So I'm going to make that one green. And this is the next one that I want to bring in. So I'm going to take a look at this, take a look at this, and I'm going to do any color tweaks so that I can actually look at the highlights here. I want it to be close. So here, this is a little bit brighter. So what I'm actually going to do with this scene is just bring the shadows up just a little tiny bit, just to compensate. So when I look at this one compared to this one, they're very close. So shadows are going to be very close. And I'll go ahead and export this. We'll bring it into Photoshop. Select all. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. And here's what I'm actually going to do, and you can see the difference between this and this. If you want a darker, more dramatic scene, you can use one of these dark blue hours or full night shots. So some people like to have the glow from the buildings. They think it makes it look a little bit more dramatic. I'm cool with having something that's super clean. Like I like a super clean sky as opposed to something that's going to have spotlights. I feel like that, I don't know, for me it's not really my style, but I'm not going to discourage you if it's something that you like as well. So feel free to use whichever one that you want. But in this case, what I'm going to do is just mask in the area that I want to use. And I'm going to do that with a gradient, very easy gradient, which is going to start right about here and end about here. So now you can see I have the bottom of the layer that I'm bringing in, which is going to be the late blue hour, works really well. And what I'm actually going to do is just clean up some of this here. Just with the brush, I want to make sure that I don't paint in everything, just the areas that I want, basically just those light trails. So we have our base, we have our super highlights, and then I can just go ahead and put this on top here. We have our light trails. So that's starting to look pretty good. Let's go back inside of Capture One. So I've done this. Now what I want to do is bring in a few more layers. Let's just start from the left to the right. We'll go ahead and bring this one in too. So I'll export, variants. We're going to do these one at a time so that I can show you guys exactly what's going on here. Bring this in here and put it right on top. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I don't want to replace it with this. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is link it to this layer by holding Option and clicking it. So now it's going to exist inside of this mask here. So you can see the before and after of this one to this one. But what I'm going to do is change this to the lighten blending mode. And when I do that, it's going to pop all of those highlights in on top. Now here on the left, looks awesome. Doesn't look so good on the right. So what I'm going to do is add a mask here, and I'm going to go ahead and mask out the areas that I don't want. And in this case, I don't want any of those cars, and I don't want anything from here. I'm just concerned about having everything that's really nice from that left side. So basically what this is made up is just this one portion. So we added stacking here. We've stacked more lights to the left side. Let's go back into Capture One. Remember, this one has even more lights here and has some nice lights here as well. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to export it as variants. Now remember, I'm doing these one by one. You can do them all at once and bring them into a folder as well. Select all, copy. All right, so that's brought in. I'm going to go ahead and link it and set that to the light and blending mode again. We're going to see the positive things that it's doing as opposed to the negative. So again, I really like the left side. I like the extra light here. So what I'm actually going to do this time is I'm going to black the whole thing out. And since I know that I want to paint this area in, I'm going to go ahead and paint the lights in this area that I want. So I'm heavily stacking on this side. That looks really good, actually. And then I'm also going to stack some of these extra lights here without stacking in the cars. That's starting to look really, really awesome. It looks like we have so many cars on this road. Let's do the last one. And you can see now I'm getting more here. Let me bring this one in as well. Link it. Lighten. All right, and let's take a look. So this looks pretty good everywhere. I really like the way it looks on the bottom. I don't really like the way it looks over here, and I don't like the way it looks over here. So what I'm going to do in this case is use everything, but I don't want these cars in there. Don't want that bus. Don't want all that light, and I don't want any of this here. So let's take a look at what we have here. The cool thing, since all of these layers are linked, you can see that we have the before and after. So this is the basic scene. If you would have just gotten there, shot it, basically straight out of camera. And straight out of camera means you've set it to f8 or f11, and you're just using whatever the bracketed exposures do as far as the shutter speed. This is what you're going to end up with, some car trails. But if you wait a little bit longer, shoot separate car trails, and as long as nobody has bumped your tripod, you'll be able to go from here to here. So that's actually looking pretty good. So the next step is we're going to go ahead and create a new layer on top here, and we're going to have to do some spot removal, and in this case we're going to have to do some moon removal. So basically the same way that we're going to do the spots in the sky, I'm also going to do the moon. And you can see just like that we can get rid of the moon. There are a few spots here, a little bit of sensor dust here and there. Overall not too much, but I want to make sure to get rid of as much of it as possible as usual, because that's going to make later compositing a little bit easier. So anywhere that I think I see a spot, let's clean that up a little bit too. Sometimes it's hard to tell if something is just a weak, sort of wispy cloud, or something's actually a smudge on the lens or the sensor. Either way, it's good to get rid of it. So let's take a look at what we have so far. All right, so far that's looking pretty good. Since everything looks good, I'm going to go ahead and select everything here, and I'm going to do my usual here and call it blend, just to keep it organized from the start. Now here's where I want to do something a little bit different. I feel like the blue sky in this case, it's not really something that I can replace. I don't have anything in my catalog that's going to look right. With the vertical shot, we're using the distortion. I'd really need a lot of sky. I need a lot of sky shot at a very wide angle, maybe 14 millimeter looking up with the horizon, maybe a third, the bottom third, or even something that matched this where I could match that distortion and have a lot of the sky. So what I'm going to do is just change this blue, the attributes of the blue a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting. And what I'd like to do is from the bottom to the top of the sky, I'd like to create some sort of gradient ramp, some sort of way of having it be light from the bottom and dark on the top. Almost like the light of the city is illuminating part of the sky without causing that low glow, or like it's such an early blue hour, dramatic blue hour, that I still have some light on the horizon that fades into a darker sky. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to create a mask for the sky, or at least something close to a mask for the sky. So let's take a look at our channels and see what we can do. Now I'm going to do that with everything new that we've done intact. And you can see the reason I did this now instead of before was that I knew I was going to get rid of the moon and those dust spots. So now I have a clean image and a clean base to generate a mask from. Remember these alphas that we created? We can go ahead and delete them. Anytime you create new alpha channels, it actually changes the file size. So it's good to delete the masks that you're not using in the channels palette. That'll help you keep the file size down. On a similar note, we'll go back into the layers and I'll show you guys ways that you can keep the file size down there as well. But right now we're going to use this. Let's take a look at what we have here. Red channel, fairly contrasty. Green, almost similar, but look at the blue. So much blue in the sky, let's go ahead and start with this. We'll duplicate it, and let's see if I can get the sky to be mostly white. We'll bring up the curves and start with trying to isolate some of the buildings. And let's just go crazy here. Let's clamp the heck out of this thing here. That looks pretty good. And we'll just go ahead and clamp it down as well. All right. Now I know this seems pretty harsh, it's a pretty harsh clamp, but that's okay. We're just going to go ahead and use something that's extremely crispy, because this is basically as far as I've clamped anything for you guys so far. And I want to show you that just because we're working with color corrections in general, we're not doing any precision compositing, we can get away with something like this. And I'll show you why. So let's just go ahead and clamp it. Yeah, let's just go nuts with that here. That looks good. Just like that, and I'll say okay. This is a hideous looking garbage mask, but I'm going to go ahead and load it. And we'll go back to the layers. I'll create a new folder with a mask on it. Before I do anything here, I just want to show you guys right now my working file size is 1.5 gigs. That's huge. We've been working with the D800, that's 36 megapixels. For a lot of this tutorial, we've been working with the XT1, which is much smaller because it's half the resolution, which is really great when you're doing this kind of post-processing. So what I'm actually going to point out here is take a look at this layer here. Notice this mask. I'm not using anything below this mask, so I can actually get rid of everything above it. So if I did something like this, I could delete all of that image. Same thing here, I can delete all of that image, and that's actually going to drop that working file size from basically from 1.5 gigs down to 1.2 gigs. So it's made it much smaller. It's going to be easier to work with now. I'll just save that just in case, and we'll talk a little bit more about this mask. So you can see, not the best mask in the world. We've definitely done better and cleaner ones together, but here's what I'm going to do. Since I want to lighten the bottom of the image first, I'm going to go ahead and create a curves layer. And I'm going to apply that curves layer inside of the folder, and I'm basically just going to do this. I'm going to ramp that up. That looks pretty good so far. Notice that it's mostly affecting the sky. Well, that looks pretty good. So first thing that I'm going to do is draw a gradient on this. So from dark or black to white, I want it to look like it's illuminating just the bottom of the sky. So that looks pretty good. And before I make any adjustments to this, I want to get this to be just right, exactly how I want it, so that we have a nice bright sky from the bottom here. And that's starting to look pretty good. Let's change the curves a little bit more. Yes, I am clipping things, which is perfectly fine. Now what I'm going to do inside of this mask is I'm actually going to go in here and I'm going to paint out what I don't need. So I don't want really much of this to be affected, so I'm just going to go ahead and paint all this out here. I don't want any of this in the foreground to be affected. I don't want any of this to be affected up here. None of this. None of this here. And I'll do a lighter brush so that basically fades out a lot of this, fades out a lot of this. This is not crucial because remember, those lights were never blown out in the first place, so it's not going to look like they're blown out in the sky. But I'll just go ahead and mask a lot of this out. And I'm using a soft brush because I don't really want to roll over the sky. A lot of this in the building, I'm going to say is perfectly fine. Side of the building, perfectly fine. Works pretty well. And we'll take a look here again. So we have, yeah, that looks pretty good. It's even done some nice things here. It's popped this building detail out a little bit. So now that I have the brightness from the bottom, I'll create a new curves layer, and I'll do just the opposite. But in this case, I'll pull it down like this. Just like that. And with something like that, I'll go ahead and create another mask, and this time I'll reverse that because I want it to be white to black, just like this. That looks pretty good. So now we can make adjustments to our mask. We can see how much we wanted that to fade. So we basically have this nice fade from light to dark at the top. We can even go a little bit more extreme on this one by clipping it instead. That looks pretty good. All right, so we have a really dramatic, actually that's too good. Let's roll it back just a little bit more. Perfect. So now we have a little bit more, it's not texture. What it is, it's just more character in the sky. So I'm taking advantage of this sort of being glowy from the bottom and working its way up. All right, so now that I have that, what I can actually do is just go ahead and throw this inside of this folder right on top. So we have everything going on here, and I can always make those adjustments. Or what I can do, and what I would like to do, is just leave them outside here, just in case I want to make changes later. So the idea is here, if I like everything that I'm going to do, and in fact, I actually do like everything, so I'm going to put it inside of this folder. But what I could do is I could keep adjusting and taking this into ColorFX Pro, or ON1, or MacFun, and I could leave this color correction on top. But what I actually want to do is bake it into the layer, because this is what I want my new base to work like. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that inside a blend, so we have everything inside of here. And then blend selected, I'm just going to make a copy of everything so that we can take it to the next step. And what I'm going to do first is just add some simple contrast to this. And again, I'm going to use Nik Collection ColorFX Pro. Pro contrast is already selected, so let's just go ahead and add some more contrast to everything. Nice dynamic contrast here. I like the way that's shaping up. And now see, if I pull this up, you notice how it's correcting the sky too. Since I made that all part of the collapsed layer, that's doing something really nice there. So it's actually color correcting my sky as well, making it and unifying it again to something more that I wanted. That looks pretty good. Let's add some tonal as well. So this is just going to add a little bit more punch to the image. A 0, I'm favoring somewhere between 8 and 15 here, just to get a little bit more punch from those values there. We'll say OK to this. That looks great. Let's call it CEP contrasts. And since I already have this other layer intact, we'll put it right back on top, and we'll go ahead and throw our high pass filter on there now too, just to get that out of the way. And I'll say overlay here, and you're going to see all that detail is going to pop out for us, which is perfect. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and hit save on this while we go back into Color Efex Pro. So right now what I've done is I've worked pretty hard to make sure that the light, all the light in the scene is really coming from the bottom and working its way up. I really want the eye to be drawn, not just with the composition of all these leading lines. This is a leading line, it's leading line mania here, but what I'd like is them to be drawn to it not just because of all those converging lines, but also because of the light. So with all this light from the bottom of this image, what we can do is we can create a glow. So I've already kind of created a low glow in the sky from lighting from the building, should be, causing it to be lighter on the bottom than it is on the top. So that was a nice touch. But what I want to do now is add some sort of subtle glow to the lights as well. So with all these car trails, I want that to glow a little bit. So here's a technique for being able to get that nice, soft, sort of Orton-y effect on the light. So while this is saving, I'm just going to go ahead and with this already adjusted layer selected, we're going to go back into Color Efex Pro. I'm going to introduce a filter here, really one of my favorite. It's called Classical Soft Focus. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see that it's giving us that nice glowy effect to the image overall. So we're getting this really nice glow. And if I turn the strength up, you can see that that'll intensify. I have to be careful here when I do that too much, because if I start doing it too much, you can see that it's going to blow everything out. It's going to make it a little too intense. Now I can try to protect the highlights too, so that I get a more intense but softer glow. So that's an option too. It really depends on how far I want to push that. But in this case, I'm going to take that down. I'm going to go back down to, I'd say, about 60%. Diffuse detail does not help a little bit. It just tries to pull some detail in. Brightness does make a big difference here. You can see the brightness will change it overall. Be very careful with this. You don't want to add too much brightness to the scene, maybe just a little bit. And just with these 3 sliders, glow, protect the highlights, you can actually get something that goes from this to this. So we're going to go ahead and go with that. Hey, we'll just crank it up just a little bit more and say OK. Cool. So this is pretty intense. You guys see that's a lot of glow. I don't really want that much glow, but it does create a completely more, I'd say, dreamy look to your cityscapes. I like my cityscapes to look very realistic and sharp and heavily detailed. So this kind of glow will definitely take some of that detail away. Cool thing is if you leave the high pass filter on top of it, it helps to chisel out some of that detail a little bit more. But what I'm going to do here with this classical soft focus, like I said, I want to lead the eye up with glow and light. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put a gradient on this. And I'm just going to fade it from about here to here. And now you can see I get a glowy bottom layer. And that looks pretty cool. It's made more intense light, like this whole thing's glowing. And what I'm also going to do is just kind of show my quick mask. And I'm going to brush out some of the areas that I don't want this glow to happen, which is basically this area, this part of the building. Take it down a little bit here. It's always good to start with a gradient. No, maybe nothing here as well. Just like that. So we go from this to this. That looks pretty good. What is kind of nice too, if you zoom in, notice that that glow has created more light around these objects. So with this much light surging around sort of this median of grass, you can see that that glow has actually helped to intensify all of that light. And it basically adds just this great dreamy effect to all those lights in the city and just makes it a little bit better than it was before. The cool thing too is we also have the high pass. And you can see with the high pass filter is really chiseling out these details. And you can see that right on top here. We're getting all of those nice edges back. And this is really good. This is why high-pass filters work great in the city. We have so much detail back there that just pops out, especially in these areas here, like those spikes there. You can see that it's really popping out those details and giving it more of a three-dimensional look. But basically, this scene has just been a lot of fun. So we could have just gone there, shot one long exposure and hoped for the best. But in this case, we planned to be there for a good series of time, all the way from early blue hour, all the way through the beginning of nighttime, basically, to be able to capture all these light trails and get them all together and then create this glowy effect. So let's just take a look at how we started and what we ended up with. So you can see our original adjusted raw here. It's already a really cool scene, to be honest. It has some really cool character, just an awesome composition. You can see all these tall buildings. We're using distortion to our advantage. But we've been able to go from here to here. And you can see now it has much more character and really feels like it belongs in the portfolio. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this lesson. I hope this makes capturing light trails and stacking light trails much more easy next time you're out in the field.